obviously we have this one in our report as well. So you can get more detail on all these buildings in the report. Just quickly moving northward, another one of the beautiful, nicely scaled commercial residential buildings. This one's at the corner of, is that Glen Lake? Hood or Glen Lake and Broadway. Look at the much beloved lickety-split. Then another great Art Deco gem on the strip, the now very popular Broadway antique market. It's actually 2 stories. You don't have windows on the front there because you got all that great terracotta ornamentation, which I don't know if you've ever taken a close look, but some really wacky stuff in there. Series of animal motifs. It's in pretty good shape, but obviously not in perfect condition. Some damaged terracotta here. There's another one of the geese and a turtle. I just love these pieces. And then further north at the northwest corner of Granville and Broadway, another very beautifully detailed, well-preserved building. For many, many years it was the home for the art framing studio. It's now an empty space, but we have the long-term, my favorite dive bar in all of Edgewater is the Sovereign. But again, it's in great shape. The terracotta cornice is still intact, a lot of beautiful ornamentation. You have the nicely detailed doorway for the residential access. You have commercial spaces on both Broadway and Granville here. And continuing north, again, some somewhat unremarkable but nicely scaled buildings, a combination of 2- and 3-story commercial residential buildings. The Bar Funeral Home is probably the most well-known among them. Do you know if that had a lot of work done on it, Tom? Did you work on that one? It looks like the brickwork was redone.
No, this was all remodeled. This whole Bar Funeral Home was all remodeled. I did not work on that one.
Not bad, though, in my estimation. Another building that, flies under the radar, but when you stop and look at it, I think you'd be very much impressed. So a lot of nice detailing work, nicely articulated doorways, and this kind of verticality over the doorways that's emphasized by the coins running up the sides of the building.
Can I ask, the client owner was Harry Weiss? Not our Harry.
Weiss.
Okay.
Not Harry Weiss, the architect. No.
Weiss.
Harry wasn't around back in 1926.
I love that architect's name.
Yeah. Orlando Van Guten. So you see some of the detailing there. Again, a lot of wonderful ornamentation with the WB, not Warner Brothers, but the Weiss building. So again, someone who had a lot of pride in ownership, and so much so he stuck his name on the building. This is a very popular building over at Rosemont and Broadway. It's currently the Shali Center. It had a lot of lives prior to that, and Tom is intimately familiar with this because he led the adaptive reuse work on the building. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, as you know, the history of this site was the Zanadu restaurant back in the 60s, 70s. It burned down, and there was a major fire there, and it sat vacant for years and years, and the Smiley congregation contacted me to renovate it into their new mosque. We worked for years on this, and even about halfway through construction, it burnt down. We had all wooden trusses in the back, and something with the contractor caught fire, burned all the wooden trusses. But we kept on, and we replaced all the wooden trusses in back in the major Jot McConnell space in the back of Prayer Hall, and we had them all replaced in wood. And their whole concept of what all the details in the Ismaili Mosque was that you can't have any people forms, any foliage, any people in any of the details. It all had to be about geometry and the intertwining of geometry, because that's how the community works. The poor people work with the rich people, they bring food in to help the poor, and it's all about linking all of their congregation together, and it's all about geometry and linkage. So all these details that I did on the outside were all about those sort of forms linking in with each other, and the windows, all the patterns in the doors, and all the details on the inside were all based on that sort of geometry.
And then you integrated it with a lot of very well preserved original elements of the building as well. So really one of the shining examples of adaptive reuse on Broadway. And we'll end more or less with some of the tragic losses on the street. This building stood at the southwest corner of Devine and Broadway for many years. I was actually at a cub reporter covering the city council meeting when this was pushed through the demolition court. Alderman Bernie Stone at the time. I remember him. He was one of the famous gas bags of the city council, and going on about what a terrible blight this property was to the land and so forth. So I don't know. This was pre Edgewater Historical Society days. I don't know if there was much of an effort by anyone to try to save the building. I think it might have been owned by Lou Wolf, one of the most notorious slumlords in Chicago
I took this
history.
photo in the late 80s when it was just before it was going to be demolished. Beautiful Art Deco, highly detailed building on the corner, just a little gem.
Yeah. And there was actually another very significant building on this property before.
Wow, that was on that site previous to the Art Deco building.
Wow, much better.
Can you imagine if we had this building?
This was really, I don't know how you would begin to describe that architectural style. It was hallucinatory, perhaps. But it was a very popular restaurant inside Doyle's, and we at the museum have some photos of the interior space. It was kind of a big open dining hall on the first floor.
With these details, it would be something that Silsby would have done, this romantic sort of gingerbread architecture style that he would have done. But we don't really know. This is just from a postcard that I found years ago on the internet.
And right now this site is occupied by the Quonset hut-like Starbucks coffee, which, I mean, that is obviously one of the great redevelopment opportunities along Broadway. So hopefully before anything of note goes down to redevelopment, we can see some of these strip mall type structures go first. So we'll just talk very quickly about some of the stuff that's been built in recent years. Obviously there's a desire to increase the density on much of the street. This has been going on for quite some time. There was obviously a lot of public process involved in changing the zoning on Broadway to facilitate development, but also to put some height limitations on it and so forth. So this building is it's across the street from St. Ida's. It was designed by a local architect and one of my neighbors, Peter Nicholas. I think it's one of the nicer looking buildings that have gone up in the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah, a good example of a developer who lived in the neighborhood, sat on many committees in the community with me, and he really cared about design because he was an architect in his past world too. So just how he broke the facade up, the curved roof, the articulation of the space, that's how a modern developer should do a building. And it's not historic, but at least it's articulated and it's got a classic character, and he paid attention to light, scale, proportions, base, middle, and cap.
I have to say, the high rise I live in, I view that the church, and used to have a full view of the church since that building was built, and the fact that that goes up around the road, it cuts the view from the high rise. Now I think architecturally speaking, when you're trying to sell high rise condos, the view makes a difference. And I wasn't even going to apply in the building that I live in, but once you walked in and saw the view of the church, that was it. You fell in love with the unit.
You should have talked to you.
Yeah, I just come with you.
This is another newer building that went up this is right at the corner of Rosedale and Broadway. It's a new building, I think nicely detailed. This was built after there was this very robust community process about limiting the height of buildings on the west side of Broadway to 4 stories. This one went above it. But there was a lot of negotiation, and probably a number of people in the room were involved in that. But they did allow the developer to go a little higher, but in exchange the developer did a few things like having the setbacks on the front of the building, and maybe even more importantly in the back of the building, so that it minimized the shadow that was falling on the buildings to the west of the site. These are very expensive condos. There was one on the market a few years ago. I went in to have a look for $400,000. You could get a modest 2-bedroom, 1.5 bath unit.
We worked several months with the owner and the alderman about this building, the setback on the front, creating this cornice on here. The cornice is on the top, making sure that it turned the corner and had some sort of pedestrian scale to the corner. There was a lot of massaging with this building with the alderman and developer.
Another one that I personally think not too bad, a little further north. This is just south of the Broadway Antique Mart. It's 5 stories, commercial on the first floor, and then 4 levels of residential above. You know, a few interesting touches here. This, I don't know if you'd call it a folly or something, but it's a kind of a mock cornice with a very contemporary look. There's a strong emphasis on the verticality of the building with the bays there and so forth. So
this is a good example of what should be on the west side of Broadway, a maximum of 6 stories, 5 or 6 stories, because that was something that was overlaid on the city as the west side should be low. It's all residential behind it, but the east side of the street with the neighbor being behind it, the L train, that's where you can build. There's where you put your massing. There's where you put your density. There's where you put your height on the east side. And I hope the city, once they start looking at this whole development and density world on Broadway, that they really look at the 2 sides of the streets differently. They are 2 different animals.
What's on in the newsletter yesterday, we were fighting, we downzoned the east side to 4 stories. I mean, we fought for that.
Right.
Sent her newsletter yesterday that empty lot can take over, that he's going to build. They did, she approved it, it's going to be 6 stories. Screw anybody that didn't want it. I mean, we have no say-so in anything.
There was a lot of people listening in the room, so hopefully your voices can be heard.
is Matt Crawford in the room by chance? I saw him the other day, and he's the person with the Department of Planning Development who's nominally responsible for historic preservation, although Chicago, though we're known internationally as a city of architecture, has a pretty pitiful city government infrastructure for managing landmarking and so forth. We're 3 times the size of San Francisco, but they have 4 times the staffing that we do. So another building that's further north up around Rosemont. This one I've got kind of mixed feelings on. It's different. It obviously is just a couple steps away from a lot of the basic brick boxes that are being thrown up as cheaply as possible. If you haven't gone over on Devon Avenue lately, they've put up some really risible, I would call it just complete crap.
We call them urban mausoleums.
What's that?
We call them urban mausoleums.
There you go, yes. Urban mausoleums. More appropriate for the dead than the living.
John, just south of that last slide, that building on the last slide.
Yeah.
Someone has bought the building and completely
Bricked
put
up.
a brick
Yeah.
in there. We don't know what's in there, do you?
It's an auto shop, and I know Pat Sharkey's out with the head of the local block club there. She's in Southeast Asia right now, I believe, but that's an ongoing conversation. But yeah, they're expanding an auto shop. There are a lot of issues and around air quality issues and so forth. So there may be more to come on that. This one's a little further south. This one's down around Hollywood. It's about as bottom of the barrel as you can get it. And if anyone lives in this building, or I don't want to personally offend you, but They do have commercial on the first floor and 3 stories of residential above. This was abiding by the 4-story limit that the zoning was suited for.
But it's important that there's transparency on that ground floor instead of brick walls. We really need that transparency. And there's a sort of movement now to put residential on the first floor and lose the commercial aspect of the first floors and the retail aspect. But I understand it, because some of those retailers really can't survive. But whatever we have to do to make it pedestrian friendly and have some sort of transparency on that first floor of the buildings is important. But this building's got some three-dimensionality with the balconies coming in and out. It's just not a series of squares boxing in it like what's on Devon Avenue. So it's a good attempt at being contextual.
So this is what replaced one of our more recent failed preservation efforts. We had a beautiful old indoor shopping arcade building there, and this went through several different iterations. There were objections about the look of the building, and every time they came back, I think they made it a little uglier. So this is, I think, largely being used for Loyola student housing.
Unfortunately, a very suburban ground floor, even though it's transparent, which is good. It's just a very strip mall ground floor with, Verizon signage and 2 different facades. I know we was trying to do here with these sort of triangles that come out to express the views out to the lake.
But it came out interesting with the color changes as you go by it.
Right. So
John?
it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Was the building they tore down, which we tried to save, but it wasn't, unfortunately, wasn't warrant rated, was the last remaining indoor arcade in the city of Chicago.
Right.
And then they had the balls to call this the arcade.
Yeah, that's adding insult to injury. So we have a picture, some pictures on the back table there of some of these other buildings, but also the poster from our campaign to try to save the building that shows that interior shopping arcade. Was anyone ever in that shopping arcade?
Yeah, I was.
Okay.
I was.
A fair number of you. I didn't really discover the interior of that building until maybe 25 years ago, and had gone by it a million times as I was driving by on Broadway. Was utterly charmed by the interior. But yeah, there had been a number of indoor shopping arcades, kind of precursors to the post-war shopping mall. But there were a number of interesting little businesses in there, but this is kind of the Loyola effect.
Harry Osterman's office connected me with the architect and developer on this building to have me work with them to make it a little more contextual, and sent me the drawings, and I emailed the developer and architect back, and they never responded to me. So that's what you got.
Another building, I think this might...
Next door to that one, those 2 things that used to be storage
Yeah.
facilities, they looked like they were going to be redeveloped, and then it came to an abrupt halt.
Hey, I believe all that is property owned by Loyola. Is there anyone from Loyola here today? No. I'm not sure they know what they're doing with all their property. They're continuing to buy. There's a very late preservation effort taking place up on building on is that Loyola Avenue, just west of the L-Tracks, a beautiful 1920s Art Deco style building that provided 30 units of affordable housing and commercial on the first floor. Lovely building. Loyola is going to knock it down despite the objections of a lot of the elected officials. This is another building back down. What is this intersection here? Is this Ardmore? I think it's Ardmore. There's another butt ugly building here made out of precast concrete. This is an Illinois Liver and Digestive Health Center or something like that. I had a colonoscopy in there once, and the experience only reinforced my pretty but ugly building across the street. By contrast, it's kind of a so-so building, but next to this one it looks good. But again, they made some efforts to do some ornamentation here on the cornice line, and a little different variable brick work, and the window framing and so forth. So they also have indoor parking on here. You can see the entrances to the garage doors. One of the major concerns I have personally, I'm a block club president in addition to my work with the Historical Society, but there's this whole push on transit-oriented developments where developers are allowed to put up very dense buildings with relatively minimal parking available. Historically, Chicago building codes required 1 parking space for every unit. Under the transit-oriented development theory, if you're closer to a mass transit line, people are going to be less dependent on cars. I support that idea completely. So right now you only have to put in 1 parking space for every 2 units. But that's the theory. How does this work in practice? I don't know that anyone's ever really gone back to look at that issue. And this is one of the issues I tried to articulate and others when we had the first meeting on Broadway upzoning. By the way, the city had probably just going to have 2 meetings on this whole thing. There are these kind of new style city engagement efforts where you don't have a room full of people having a conversation. You have these little information kiosks, and you just put a little post-it notes with whatever you think about various things. So I think it's kind of a, part of my language, a bullshit process, and they are looking to, kind of really ram something down the community's throat here. And I'm not sure really where this started. Was it with one of the aldermen, or more likely some of the bureaucrats in the planning department? I don't know that we'll ever know the answer to that. So, again, we're not unalterably, parking is already next to impossible, even west of Broadway, east of Broadway, forget about it. So we'll see, but again, Broadway is a wonderful street, and 30 years ago, we have some photos here showing what it looked like back in the bad old days. But I remember back in the 80s, I used to drive up to piano lessons in Evanston on Saturday afternoons. I lived in Uptown for 25 years before I moved up to Edgewater, but this was kind of like drive-through territory, it's just kind of like, ugh. So, but then gradually, it started looking better and better all the time, and I think right now it's looking pretty good, room for improvement, but hopefully the change that comes doesn't take it backward.
Just to let you know, we showed you 36 years of the evolution of those historic buildings on Broadway, from 1892 to 1928. That's what we just showed you. Amazing, beautiful, highly detailed architecture. I've lived in Edgewater for 36 years, and I don't know if I've seen any buildings of that detail and character in the last 36 years. So key now is, what are we doing for the next 36 years on Broadway? It's really
it could be the make or break. So with that ends our program. Happy to take questions, but also just put in a few commercial announcements. Our museum is open every Saturday and Sunday from 1 to 4. I encourage you to get over there. If you haven't seen our most recent exhibits, we're looking at a lot of changing up with new stuff next year, but we still have our great exhibit about our tree effort to advocate for Edgewater's historic trees, our timeline exhibit. Also, again, our next program will be here at 10:30 on January 11th with Cecil Adams. And we have a lot of stuff in the pipeline. If you're not a member and would like to become a member, we have brochures at the back. Again, it's $5 for your first year of membership. We'll also get our quarterly newsletter with that. If you're not a member, I encourage you to join. And let's open it up for questions.
And we are looking at board members for the next generation of the Edgewater Historical Society to make sure the Edgewater Historical Society moves on and lives on for years and years and years. So we welcome any new board members.
We're always open to new perspectives.
Turn the lights
on. Turn the lights up. Yes, ma'am?
I heard a rumor that there was some thinking about making Broadway just 2 lanes instead of 4 lanes.
Yeah, there are a lot of open questions on Broadway. There are all these various efforts to expand the city's bike network, and I know there's been talk. I don't know how far it's gotten about putting dedicated bike lanes on Broadway. I know a lot of the merchants right now. Broadway is 4 lanes of traffic plus parking on either side. I think it would be very detrimental to the businesses if they started to lose a lot of that street parking. It's also very expensive to the taxpayers because under that outrageous lease of the parking meters, anytime we take out parking spaces, we have to pay those bastards in Dubai millions of dollars, and we're doing that already all the time. So, yes, Larry.
Okay, several years ago, the city was, after a few incidents where terracotta dropped off buildings, they were taking a much closer look at terracotta around the city.
Correct.
Are they still focusing on that as much as they did then?
I believe so. The city still has an ordinance for, I believe, any building over 5 stories high that they have to do an assessment of their facades every 8 to 10 years to make sure it's all intact. So every big, large building owner really has to go through that process and hire someone to assess their entire facade.
And how
Critical
long
exam.
was there, after somebody said, hey, that's dangerous, was there any backup there? Or?
Oh yeah, they had to repair it. I believe the Bryn Mawr Apartments is doing that right now.
Yeah.
Really?
I was doing PR work for the company that owned the high-rise down on Lake and Wells, where a chunk of terracotta fell off and created an absolute full-scale panic attack at City Hall. There was all kinds of scaffolding put up over the train tracks. City Hall, in its inimitable way, went way overboard when a problem emerged, like the collapsed porch issue. So, but you know, that obviously there was a need to, you know, keep these buildings up to code and so forth. So, yes, sir.
Do we have an update on the status of the Uptown building?
Joe, anything you can add?
There was a deal to restore the theater pre-COVID. COVID killed the deal when one of the investors pulled out. The good news is the city, state, federal funding and historic tax credits are all still in play. So once the funding and the private equity end of the deal maintains, gets back to where it needs to be, the project's going to resume.
Great. Let's keep our fingers crossed. I went to that big news conference Rahm Emanuel held in the beautiful lobby of the Uptown, where he more or less promised it would be done shortly, but here we are 7, 8, 9, 10 years later, I forget.
That was the deal, COVID.